Think back to the coldest winter night of your life. That moment when the cold literally takes your breath away and you long to be inside a warm house as soon as possible. Now, are you ready to learn the chilling truth about the harshest and most unforgiving night of 1838? This tragic story unfolds on the frozen-to-the-core lands traversed by the infamous Trail of Tears. It was there that a large Cherokee family, the elderly, women, and small children, faced inhuman trials. The temperature suddenly plummeted to an abnormal 15 degrees below zero. In such cold, every movement sears the lungs, and every new step through deep snow becomes an incredible, agonizing struggle against one's own physical limits. But the worst part was not the fury of the elements at all. The real horror came from the armed government guards, who relentlessly and brutally drove the exhausted people forward through the blizzard. Under threat of severe punishment, they strictly forbade lighting life-saving fires and did not allow people to stop even for a moment's rest, forcing the group to move as a single, unbroken stream of the doomed. Be sure to watch this video until the very last second, because today we will walk through this snowy hell alongside them. You will learn what the true, terrifying price of survival was in the midst of a merciless night storm. And toward the end, I'll tell you about a remarkable act of self-sacrifice within this family, which proves that the human spirit cannot be broken by any frost. Give it a like in advance. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel, and we're off to the cold year of 1838. What if I told you that everything you believed in is a lie? The main threat came not from the guards, but from the rapidly advancing Arctic front. In the evening, the damp autumn air suddenly gave way to a piercing, dry wind. The temperature plummeted to extreme lows, turning the remaining mud into solid ice. The family closed ranks, trying to withstand the growing cold through their combined efforts. The group of 8 tried to stay as close to each other as possible on the narrow trail. The wind mercilessly tore the thin cloth capes from their shoulders. Snowflakes melted instantly on their clothes, soaking the fabric with icy moisture. Heavy footsteps sank into the deep snow, leaving dark furrows in their wake. Guards on horseback followed close behind, not allowing them to slow their pace. The frost stiffened their joints, turning ordinary movement into exhausting labor. The people's faces were covered with a thin layer of frost from their freezing breath. The icy wind grew stronger with every passing minute, sweeping across the open plain. The trees around them creaked ominously under the pressure of the snowstorm. The travelers lowered their heads to protect their eyes from the stinging ice crystals. Every kilometer they covered drained the last remnants of their meager energy. The thick darkness of the night completely obscured the outline of the horizon. The only guide was the sound of footsteps from the people walking ahead. Attempts to take cover behind tree trunks were immediately quashed by the escort. The soldiers demanded that the ranks remain in order, despite the mounting fatigue. The settlers' clothing was completely unsuitable for such harsh climatic conditions. Traditional moccasins quickly froze upon contact with the snow. Cloth shirts failed to retain heat, giving it away to the merciless wind. Woolen blankets became covered with a hard, heavy crust of ice. The family had to keep moving constantly to maintain a minimum body temperature. In the distance, a muffled roar of churning cold water could be heard. This signaled their approach to a wide and dangerous river along their route. The frozen banks were steep and slippery cliffs. The water had not yet frozen over completely due to the strong current. Huge chunks of ice floated across the black surface, colliding with one another. The convoy's order was unambiguous and brooked no objections or delays. The crossing had to begin immediately, despite the pitch-black darkness. The men began to carefully descend the icy slope toward the water. Their feet slipped on the wet ground, thickly covered with frost. It was incredibly difficult to maintain balance on such treacherous terrain. The first rows stepped into the bitterly cold, dark water. In some places, the river was waist-deep. The current knocked them off their feet, forcing them to cling to the silhouettes of those nearby. Chunks of floating ice struck the travelers' frozen limbs. A family of 8 held hands tightly, forming a human chain. The middle of the river turned out to be the most treacherous part of the entire route. The riverbed was strewn with slippery rocks of all sizes. One false move threatened to send them plunging into the icy current. The men tried to lead the way, cutting through the strong current with their chests. The The rest followed behind, trying to tread carefully in their footsteps. One of the travelers slipped on a slippery underwater rock and fell into the water. The rest of the family used their last ounce of strength to keep him from being completely submerged. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think about people's incredible endurance in such extreme conditions? Write about it in the comments and be sure to subscribe to our channel. Are you ready for the shocking truth? Their time in the water lasted only a few minutes, but it felt like an eternity. Once they reached the opposite bank, the travelers faced a new threat. Their wet clothes began to freeze rapidly in the biting wind. The fabric turned into a stiff shell, restricting any movement. Water dripped from their rags and instantly turned into sharp icicles. Every step was excruciating, as if their bodies were shackled in icy chains. The escort horses snorted, struggling to make their way onto solid ground. U.S. Army soldiers wrapped themselves in thick woolen overcoats to protect against the biting wind. They categorically refused to allow the deportees to build a fire to dry their wet belongings. The order to continue the march was given sharply and with incredible ruthlessness. The soldiers feared delays on the journey more than the mass death of their captives. The Cherokee family was forced to move on in clothes frozen through to the bone. This trek went down in history as the Trail of Tears, claiming thousands of innocent lives. That winter was unusually cold, even for these harsh northern latitudes. The Native Americans were forced to leave their warm southern homelands with virtually no preparation. Many managed to take with them only light summer clothes and thin household blankets. Now these meager belongings offered absolutely no protection from the brutal January frosts. The government machine mercilessly drove the people forward through raging blizzards. The night air felt thick and heavy from the bitter cold. Every movement was accompanied by the crunch of ice crust on blankets and shirts. People breathed heavily, exhaling thick white clouds of steam. They walked in a tight group, hoping to share with one another crumbs of precious warmth. The surrounding landscape had long since turned into a single, endless blanket of snow. The winter forest around them looked like a hostile and utterly lifeless wasteland. The family carefully supported the relative who had fallen into the river. His clothes were the most frozen, covered with a thick layer of transparent ice. The elders gave him their least damp cloaks to preserve what little warmth remained. It was an act of incredible self-sacrifice in the face of total and deadly cold. The Indians understood perfectly well that without help, the injured man would freeze to death in literally half an hour. Movement became his only way to maintain blood circulation and stay alive. The icy river water became one of the most grueling trials along the entire route. The ferries often could not handle the flow of people, and many fords had to be crossed on foot. Sharp pieces of broken ice cut into their feet, and the swift current knocked the weakest among them off their feet. Soldiers urged on those who fell behind with blows from their rifle butts, forbidding any prolonged stops. Mothers carried their babies high above their heads, trying to shield them from the scalding water. But saving the children from the merciless winter wind on the shore was nearly impossible. People's steps grew slower and slower, and their legs felt like incredibly heavy cast-iron weights. The snow beneath the guards' sturdy boots crunched with a piercing, dry sound. Tall trees cast long black shadows in the light of the dim winter moon. The silence was broken only by the eerie howl of the wind and the monotonous shuffling of people's footsteps. No one complained aloud, maintaining a deep and grim silence to conserve their strength. Conversation in such freezing cold drained too much energy from their exhausted bodies. Navigating the night forest demanded the utmost concentration from every member of the march. The snow-covered white hills looked absolutely identical from every point on the horizon. The armed guards used compasses and maps, constantly checking the column's direction. The Cherokee, however, relied solely on intuition and years of experience living in the wild. They read the wind direction by the treetops and the steep slopes of the hills. Even in such a desperate situation, the exiles did not lose their deep spiritual connection to the land. Getting lost in such conditions meant certain death from hypothermia before dawn. Sometimes the blizzard completely obscured the people walking ahead, breaking the column's single line. At such moments, the tribal leaders used special throat calls to check on one another. These muffled sounds carried through the howling storm, helping the lost find their way back to their people. The soldiers initially banned these signals, but then realized their immense practical value. The prisoners' survival remained their official duty to the state command. Strength gradually deserted the weakest and sickest members of this long march. Younger relatives took them by the arms, preventing them from falling into the deep snow. Stopping even for a single brief minute meant freezing almost instantly. The escort continued to roughly urge on those who had fallen behind with loud and irritated commands. The soldiers themselves wanted to reach warm shelter and a hot dinner as quickly as possible. The distance to the next temporary camp seemed absolutely endless to the Indians. The wind suddenly changed direction, beginning to blow viciously right into the travelers' exhausted faces. Snow whirlwinds rose high from the ground, blinding and completely disorienting the group. People instinctively covered their faces with the edges of their frozen, stiff woolen blankets. This helped warm the icy air they breathed just a little and protect their lungs from burning. Every step forward was a real victory over the raging, icy elements. The people were battling not only the harsh elements, but also their own paralyzing exhaustion. At the top of the hill, the wind reached its maximum and truly destructive force. Trees were sparse here, so the people found themselves completely defenseless against the storm's merciless blows. The soldiers had to dismount and lead their frightened horses by the reins for safety. In such terrifying moments, the line between the guards and the prisoners temporarily blurred. They all became simply fragile living beings, trying to survive the fury of the savage winter. However, as soon as the descent ended, the familiar strict army discipline was immediately restored. Snow continued to blanket the trail, making every subsequent step more difficult for the exhausted travelers. The icy crust on their clothing grew thicker under the onslaught of the night frost. The guards only increased the pace of the march, ignoring the settlers' mounting fatigue. What do you think? What navigation skills help people find their way in the snowy haze? In the next chapter, you'll learn what unique methods of staying warm were used while on the constant move. A secret passed down from generation to generation. For centuries, indigenous peoples developed methods for surviving in extreme conditions. One such method was a special breathing technique in severe cold. Air was inhaled slowly in small portions so as not to cool the lungs. Exhalation was done smoothly, retaining body heat for as long as possible. This prevented dangerous spasms of the airways in severe sub-zero temperatures. The family moved with a special, measured stride that conserved energy. They avoided sudden movements to prevent excessive sweating. In such cold, sweat could instantly freeze into a layer of ice on the skin. Smoothly shifting weight from one foot to the other helped maintain a steady rhythm. Native American hunters had used this gait for centuries during long winter expeditions. This ancient walking technique allowed them to safely cover truly vast distances. In addition, people tried to step in each other's footsteps, conserving the energy of those walking behind. The person at the head of the column took on the hardest work of breaking through the virgin snow. He expended a colossal amount of calories, clearing the way for his exhausted fellow tribesmen. The rest simply had to place their feet carefully into the deep tracks already made. This wise tactic saved up to a third of the entire group's energy on difficult snow-covered stretches. This was vital, given the meager rations and the prisoners' constant malnutrition. The travelers periodically switched places within their tight group. Those who had been walking in front and taking the brunt of the wind moved to the center. Those in the center had the opportunity to warm up a little from the heat of the others. This constant rotation helped the entire family survive as a single unit. Surprisingly, a flock of penguins in the harsh Antarctic survives in exactly the same way. Collective mutual aid was not just a tradition, but the foundation of their cultural code. In this living formation, the children were given the safest and warmest spot right in the middle. The adults shielded them with their bodies from the icy gusts of the biting north wind. Mothers constantly checked their little one's pulse and breathing, afraid of missing any signs of freezing. If a child began to fall asleep on the move from the cold, they were immediately awakened and forced to keep moving. Sleep in such weather conditions was deceptively sweet, but inevitably led to a swift death. Concern for the next generation compelled the adults to summon superhuman strength. To protect their hands, they used the long sleeves of their shirts. Their hands were tucked deep into the fabric, away from the icy air. Their fingers were constantly in motion to stimulate blood circulation. They rubbed frozen areas of their faces with a dry cloth. Using snow for rubbing was considered a dangerous mistake, leading to microtraumas. These simple actions prevented severe frostbite of exposed skin. The women of the tribe also used dry grass, which they had thoughtfully gathered back in the fall. They placed this valuable material in their wet shoes as an additional insulating layer. The grass absorbed excess, destructive moisture and created a small air cushion under the foot. This simple invention saved hundreds of people from the inevitable loss of their toes. Experienced elders taught the young on the go how to properly distribute this insulation inside their moccasins. Even a handful of ordinary dry leaves could mean the difference between survival and disability. Clothing was layered, creating air pockets for warmth. Even frozen blankets retained their shape, shielding against the direct wind. The hems of cloaks were pulled tightly against the body with straps. This minimized the loss of precious heat while walking. Small stones heated over a fire just before setting out were often hidden under outer garments. Every detail of the clothing was used with the greatest possible efficiency. The guards watched the group's organization with surprise. The soldiers themselves suffered from the cold, despite their high-quality uniforms. They periodically dismounted to warm up by walking briskly. The deportees, however, moved with a frightening and monotonous calm. Their fortitude commanded involuntary respect, even from the harshest of the guards. Some officers later called this march the most grueling ordeal of their military careers. It is striking that the level of discipline among the indigenous people was higher than in the regular army. The Native Americans did not panic, did not throw tantrums, and obeyed their elders without question. When the escort horses refused to go through the blizzard, the people continued their stubborn march. The soldiers secretly drank strong alcohol from flasks, but this provided only a short-lived, illusory effect. The alcohol quickly dilated their blood vessels, leading to an even more rapid loss of heat. The Cherokees' clear-headedness and iron will prove to be far better weapons against the winter. People's thoughts were focused on memories of their homeland. Concentrating on these inner images helped distract them from the cold. They recalled the warmth of the summer sun and the dense green forests. This psychological practice created an inner barrier against despair. Their faith in higher powers gave them incredible confidence on this terrifying journey. Their spirit remained unbroken, despite the cruelty of nature. The songs and rhythmic prayers they recited to themselves set the necessary pace for their entire journey. Music had always been an integral and vital part of this proud people's culture. In their minds, they sang ancient hymns, matching each step to a familiar rhythm. This put the people into a state of light trance, dulling the sharp sensation of physical pain. Their consciousness seemed to separate from their freezing bodies, allowing their bodies to function on pure autopilot. This psychological shield was no less important than warm cloaks or proper breathing. They understood that stopping was tantamount to total defeat. Movement was life, and stillness meant a swift end. The inner strength of these people surpassed any physical limitations. Their journey continued through the darkness and the raging snowstorm. Please like this video if you appreciate the resilience of the human spirit. Guess what happened next? The deepest, darkest part of the long night was approaching. Fatigue began to affect the coordination of even the strongest men. People started stumbling more often over roots hidden beneath the snow. The escort struggled to keep their exhausted horses in line. The snow had stopped, but the wind had grown even more piercing and biting. The clouds had cleared, revealing a bright but utterly cold moon. The moonlight cast deep, stark shadows on the snow. The surrounding forest seemed frozen in eternal, icy stillness. The sound of footsteps echoed unimpeded across the frozen valley. The group emerged onto a vast plain, completely exposed to the winds. There were no trees here to offer protection from the icy gusts. The family had to huddle even closer together, forming a single monolith. The wind literally knocked them off their feet, forcing them to lean forward. Walking in a straight line became practically impossible due to the elements. The guards also suffered from the lack of natural cover on the plain. Their orders sounded muffled and were often carried away by gusts of wind. The soldiers pulled their collars high up over their faces, leaving only their eyes exposed. The distance between the escorts and the settlers increased slightly. Nature had temporarily leveled the playing field for all participants in this brutal march. On the plain, the snow had been packed down by the wind into a hard crust. Walking on such a surface was easier than through deep drifts. However, the slippery surface required constant balancing. People leaned on one another, creating a stable living structure. Their pace increased slightly thanks to the firm ground. The cold penetrated through all layers of their frozen and damp clothing. Their bodies began to shake with a fine, uncontrollable tremor. It was the body's natural reflex to generate internal heat. The travelers tried not to pay attention to this warning sign. Their will was stronger than the physiological reactions of their freezing bodies. Mental exhaustion was becoming no less dangerous than the frost. The monotony of movement lulled the mind, inducing dangerous drowsiness. The family spoke in short phrases to stay alert. Their quiet voices blended with the sound of the ceaseless northern wind. Talking helped them maintain their focus on the long walk. The plain seemed like an endless desert, devoid of any landmarks. The moon moved slowly across the sky, marking the hours of suffering. Each new gust of wind brought another wave of stinging ice. The blankets had turned into heavy armor, weighing down their shoulders. My legs moved mechanically, obeying only deep instincts. In this white void, the sense of space and time faded away. All that remained was a single, unceasing effort directed forward. The family continued on their way, despite the monstrous hardships. Their endurance became a symbol of quiet but powerful resistance. The march turned into a test of the limits of human endurance. The end of the plain offered no sign of imminent relief. The dark outline of a new forest loomed far ahead. Could you walk that many kilometers across the ice without sleep? In the next chapter, you'll find out how they coped with the terrible weather across the rugged terrain. Entering the forest brought some relief from the headwind. However, the deep snow between the trees once again slowed their progress. The darkness here was much thicker than on the open plain. The branches of the coniferous trees hung low over the trail itself. We had to constantly dodge the heavy, frost-covered branches. The forest was filled with quiet but eerie nighttime sounds. The frozen tree trunks emitted loud cracks that sounded like gunshots. This sound made both the horses and the exhausted people flinch. Tree roots formed dangerous traps beneath the snow. The rugged terrain demanded a tremendous exertion of all their strength. The guards dismounted as the horses could not make their way through the windfall. The soldiers led their horses by the reins, trampling a narrow path. The settlers followed behind, trying to stay in the tracks they had made. This saved a little energy, but did not save them from general exhaustion. The dense forest seemed like an endless labyrinth with no visible exit. The air in the forest was still, but even colder. The lack of wind was offset by the concentration of frosty dampness. A thick layer of frost lay on every needle and every branch. Breath turned into icy dust that settled on their shoulders. The family continued to move forward with methodical persistence. Suddenly, the trail dropped sharply, forming a steep descent. The coldest and heaviest air pooled at the bottom of the ravine. The descent down the icy slope took a great deal of time and effort. They had to cling to the bushes to keep from sliding into the darkness. People passed their hands to one another, providing support on the slope. The bottom of the ravine was littered with large boulders and fallen tree trunks. Overcoming each obstacle drained precious energy. Their feet sank knee-deep into the loose snow. The family worked in unison, helping each other climb over the logs. Their coordination remained flawless, even in a state of complete exhaustion. Climbing out of the ravine proved to be an even tougher ordeal. The slope was incredibly steep and covered with a hard crust of ice. The soldiers struggled to pull their horses up the high bank. The Cherokees scrambled after them, clinging to the rocks with frozen fingers. Emerging from the ravine was a small but important tactical victory. Just beyond the ravine, the forest began to gradually thin out and brighten. The space between the trees widened, letting in the moonlight. The trail became wider and smoother, making the rest of the night march easier. However, fatigue had already reached its critical, maximum limit. The body demanded rest, but the mind ordered them to keep going. Every step came at the cost of incredible willpower. Their eyes were closing from exhaustion and constant strain in the darkness. The surrounding world had narrowed to the back of the person walking ahead. Their thoughts became fragmented and focused solely on survival. The family moved forward as if a single, flawless mechanism. This stretch of the journey revealed the true cost of their resilience. The terrain was as unforgiving as the guards themselves. Nature kept throwing new obstacles in their path. But neither steep ravines nor deep snow could stop them. The people continued their endless march in the name of preserving their lineage. I discovered this by accident. After emerging from the forest, the group encountered the aftermath of a recent blizzard. Massive snowdrifts loomed ahead, blocking the path. The wind had piled up huge drifts, some as high as a man's chest. The convoy stopped, assessing the difficulty of the obstacle before them. The horses refused to go forward, sinking deep into the loose snow. The guards were forced to order the settlers to break a path. A family of 8 stepped forward to face the elements. Those in the lead did the hardest physical work. They pressed down the snow with their weight, creating a narrow trench. This work drained the last remnants of the warmth they had conserved overnight. Their clothes were soaked again from constant contact with the snow. The family quickly rotated the lead position to distribute the load evenly. Each person performed this grueling task for as long as they could endure. Then the next person took over, continuing to break through the snowdrift. The soldiers and horses moved along the path already prepared by the men. Even on the well-trodden path, movement remained extremely difficult. Snow constantly fell from the edges of the trench, bearing their feet. The cold seeped through the wet fabric straight to their tired muscles. The struggle against the snow seemed endless and utterly hopeless. Soon the drifts became slightly lower, easing the heavy work. The group was able to return to a more even and faster walking pace. However, the labor they had endured left a deep mark on their condition. Their breathing became rapid, and their movements lost their former fluidity. The family closed ranks once more, supporting their weakened kin. The moon began to slowly sink toward the horizon, heralding the end of the night. The sky took on a deep dark blue hue before the coming dawn. The cold reached its absolute peak for the entire duration of the march. The air rang with frost, stinging every exposed part of the body. The final hours before dawn were always considered the most difficult. People walked with their heads bowed and their eyes closed against the headwind. They navigated solely by the sound of others' footsteps. Their minds hovered on the edge of reality and deep sleep. The instinct for self-preservation kept their legs moving by inertia. It was a state bordering on complete physical shutdown. Only close family ties kept them from falling into the snow. The feeling of a fellow traveler's shoulder gave them the strength they needed for the next step. Their unity was stronger than any orders and any frost. They didn't say a word, but understood each other without speaking. This silent understanding was their main weapon against the elements. The road leveled out again, turning into a wide, snow-covered clearing. The wind died down a little, giving the exhausted travelers a brief respite. However, the frost continued its relentless work of chilling their bodies. Have you ever faced such severe frosts in your life? In the next chapter, you will learn how the knowledge of their ancestors helped them navigate the icy wilderness. The culture of the indigenous peoples of North America is inextricably linked to nature. For centuries, they studied the behavior of the elements and the features of the landscape. This deep knowledge helped them survive in the harshest conditions. During the night march, these skills became their lifeline. They read the snow-covered forest as easily as an open book. Even in the dark, they could determine their direction by the bark of the trees. The side covered with a thicker layer of frost pointed north. The direction of the wind hinted at likely weather changes in the coming hours. The crunch of snow underfoot indicated the current air temperature. The environment constantly sent them vital signals. They knew how to find edible roots and frozen berries under the snow. During the convoy's brief stops, they gathered these scraps of food. They chewed the hard berries slowly so as not to damage their frozen teeth. This minimal sustenance provided a few carbohydrates to keep them going. Nature continued to feed them, even in such desperate moments. Their use of natural cover was perfected. They instinctively chose a route with the least wind resistance. The group skirted the hills so as to always remain on the leeward side. This saved a tremendous amount of energy during the hours-long march. The guards often failed to understand the logic behind their seemingly random maneuvers. Attention to detail saved them from many hidden dangers. A change in the color of the snow warned of a deep pit or a spring. Thin ice over voids was identified by the muffled sound of footsteps. The group skillfully avoided these traps without slowing down. The soldiers blindly followed them, trusting their natural instincts. Even the frozen water in the river became a subject of their study. The direction of cracks in the ice indicated the thickness of the ice cover. They chose areas with the strongest and darkest ice. This allowed them to avoid repeated falls into the scalding cold water. Knowledge of the physics of ice was an integral part of their vast experience. The ability to anticipate animal behavior also played a role. The absence of animal tracks signaled the approach of a severe snowstorm. The silent forest warned of the need for extreme caution. They sensed the mood of nature on a deep subconscious level. This connection remained unbroken even under strict guard. Silent communication within the group took place continuously. A tilt of the head or a movement of the hands served as precise instructions. This language of gestures was imperceptible to the soldiers accompanying them. The family functioned as a single organism with a shared nervous system. Interaction occurred at the level of ancient survival instincts. The knowledge of their ancestors was not recorded in books or textbooks. It was passed down through practical experience in such extreme situations. This night march became a severe test of their culture's resilience. Their traditions proved incredibly viable and effective in practice. Nature remained their primary teacher and stern mentor. The experience of past generations helped them survive this darkest of nights. They did not fight nature, but adapted to its harsh laws. This philosophical acceptance of reality preserved their psychological well-being. Knowledge proved more important than warm blankets and sturdy shoes. Their culture of survival passed this terrible test with flying colors. Physical hardships were compounded by constant psychological pressure from the escort. The soldiers were in a bad mood due to the intense cold and fatigue. They took out their anger on the silent people walking ahead. Loud shouts and constant threats broke the silence of the night forest. This pressure created an atmosphere of constant tension and fear. The guards deliberately set an uneven pace for the entire column. At times, they demanded that the column speed up, almost breaking into a light jog. At other times, they suddenly slowed the pace, forcing the people to freeze in the icy wind. This erratic rhythm wore the body down far more than a steady march. It was a deliberate tactic to break the will of the deportees. The soldiers forbade the settlers from speaking to one another during the march. Any attempt at communication was met with threats of physical force. The escort tried to break their unity, turning them into a scattered crowd. However, the Cherokees continued to communicate through subtle glances and gestures. Their social bonds proved stronger than any army prohibitions. The guards periodically flaunted their superior provisions. They loudly discussed their upcoming rest in a warm fort by the fireplace. They drank hot coffee from thermoses right in front of the freezing people. This psychological cruelty was aimed at breaking their inner resolve. But the settlers responded to these provocations with complete, absolute indifference. The family ignored the soldiers' attempts to provoke conflict or panic. They looked right through their tormentors, showing no emotion. This calmness infuriated some of the more hot-headed members of the convoy. The inability to break these people's pride drove the guards into a rage. The moral victory in this standoff remained with the indigenous people. They viewed the soldiers as just another natural obstacle in their path. To them, the guards were akin to a cold wind or deep snow. One does not feel hatred toward the elements. One simply overcomes them with dignity. This philosophical stance protected the mind from the destructive influence of anger. Maintaining composure required enormous internal reserves of strength. The night concealed the true expressions on the faces of both the soldiers and the travelers. But the tension literally hung in the frosty air, like static electricity. Every step was accompanied by the anticipation of a new senseless order from the escort. However, discipline within the family remained impeccable and unshakable. They controlled their emotions better than the soldiers controlled their irritation. This psychological resilience had been instilled in them from childhood. The ability to save face in any situation was considered the highest virtue. They gave the guards no reason to resort to cruel punishments. Their obedience was formal, but their spirit remained absolutely free. Inner freedom was something that could not be taken away by force. Constant surveillance by the soldiers only brought the group closer together. A shared threat united people better than any words or declarations. The family became an invisible fortress, protecting its members from aggression. This psychological refuge allowed them to survive in inhuman conditions. External pressure only strengthened their inner resolve. The convoy failed to destroy their human dignity during the march. The soldiers controlled only their physical movement through space. Their minds and souls remained beyond the reach of the armed guards. This invisible boundary protected their cultural identity from complete annihilation. The psychological war was won by the settlers during that long night. The darkness began to slowly recede, giving way to a pale gray light. The sky in the east was tinged with cold ash and lilac hues. Dawn brought no warmth, but it finally allowed them to make out the surrounding landscape. An endless valley covered in snow and ice stretched out before the travelers. The outlines of the trees became distinct against the brightening winter sky. The morning temperature reached its lowest point of the day. The frost had gripped the world so tightly that the air seemed absolutely solid. The frost on the travelers' clothes sparkled under the first timid rays of the sun. The travelers' faces had grown gaunt and taken on a sickly, sallow hue. Their eyelashes and eyebrows were covered with a thick layer of white, fluffy frost. As the sun rose, the wind finally died down, leaving behind a ringing silence. The escort's horses moved slowly, their hooves sinking heavily into the snow. The guards looked just as exhausted as their prisoners. A sleepless night in the cold had left them all equally physically drained. Daylight laid bare the full burden of the long journey they had undertaken. The family continued on, maintaining the steady rhythm established during the night. Their steps had become automatic, devoid of any conscious thought. Their numb bodies were operating at the limits of their biological capacity for survival. Their eyes stared ahead, unable to focus on specific features of the landscape. It was a trance induced by extreme fatigue and severe hypothermia. The sun's rays reflected off the snow, blinding eyes unaccustomed to the light. They had to squint to protect their eyes from the bright glare. The icy crust on the plain glistened like scattered broken glass. Trees cast long blue shadows onto the pristine white blanket. The landscape was incredibly beautiful and at the same time, deadly dangerous. The morning did not cancel the orders for the column to advance without stopping. A stop was planned only at the next major military camp. Several more hours of grueling march through the snow remained before reaching it. People mustered their last shreds of willpower to keep from collapsing onto the road. Their consciousness functioned only to maintain an upright posture. The moisture on their clothes had finally frozen solid, turning the fabric into a wooden shell. Every movement was accompanied by the loud creaking of wool fibers, frozen through and through. It was practically impossible to remove such clothing without damaging the fabric. It had become a second skin, an icy and incredibly heavy burden. Heat remained only in the very depths of their exhausted bodies. The appearance of the sun had a significant psychological effect on the exhausted people. The light symbolized the end of the most terrifying part of their ordeal. The night had been defeated, and they had survived this Arctic cold. This tiny achievement gave them a little strength to continue on their way. The hope of a quick rest sustained their weakening muscles. The guards began to talk among themselves in livelier voices. They too were glad that this terrible, long shift was over. Their commands began to sound a little softer and less aggressive. The daylight dispelled the night's fears and eased the general tension. However, the pace of the march remained as high and steady as ever. The valley slowly opened up before the marching column of people. The snowy desert seemed endless, stretching beyond the very horizon. Dawn was not a deliverance, but merely a transition to a new stage. Ahead lay more miles of land covered in ice and snow. The journey continued with the inexorable inevitability of a harsh historical fate. The march continued under the cold light of the high winter sun. The family reorganized, allowing the most exhausted to walk in the center of the group. They supported one another, ensuring no one fell behind the column. This mutual aid remained their primary and only means of survival. Moving forward had become the sole purpose of their current existence. The kilometers covered during the night seemed like a mere drop in the ocean. Weeks of equally grueling travel remained before they reached their final destination. Coming to terms with this fact required immense mental discipline and endurance. They forbade themselves from thinking about the future, focusing instead on the present moment. All that mattered was the next step and the next breath of icy air. Many travelers' shoes had become completely ruined by the moisture. Leather moccasins had torn, unable to withstand contact with the hard ice. People wrapped their legs in scraps of fabric to protect their feet. Every step brought discomfort, but they kept moving forward. Their stoicism was astonishing and defied logical explanation. The guards periodically checked their maps to confirm they were heading in the right direction. The route ahead led through frozen swamps and dense forests. The landscape changed, but the harsh weather conditions remained the same. Winter was just beginning, promising new harsh trials for the settlers. Their adaptation to these conditions was happening on the fly. The family carried the heavy burden of having lost their past. Their homeland lay far behind them, hidden behind a veil of snowfall. Ahead lay the unknown in the new and unfamiliar territories of the reservations. This journey was transforming their culture, tempering their character in an icy crucible. The history of their people was being written right then and there in the snow. Silence became their constant and most faithful companion on the road. Words lost their meaning in the face of such a vast natural force. The silence was broken only by the crunch of snow and the snorting of weary horses. They walked, conserving their energy for what mattered most: mere survival. Their endurance became a testament to the human ability to withstand absolute hardship. The column stretched for many kilometers across the snow-covered plain. Each group solved its own local survival problems independently, but a common goal united them with invisible yet strong historical bonds. It was the journey of an entire people through ice, snow, and despair. The tragedy took on truly epic proportions against the backdrop of that winter. The wind began to pick up again, heralding the imminent return of the blizzard. The sky was covered with thin gray clouds that hid the bright winter sun. The surrounding world was once again plunged into the cold, monochromatic hues of winter. Nature had no intention of giving them a long reprieve or a rest. The group mentally prepared for a new round of battling the elements. Step by step, they approached their next temporary camp. Thoughts of a brief rest by the campfire gave them their last bit of strength. The family continued to march in close formation, despite their utter exhaustion. Their night march through the icy desert had become a symbol of absolute resilience. They had survived this night to continue their endless journey. This historical episode demonstrates the incredible willpower of indigenous peoples. Their survival was due to a deep understanding of nature and the unity of the family. They were not simply walking through the snow, they were blazing a trail into eternity. That night remained forever in their collective memory as an icy milestone. The path forward was opened, despite the full fury of the winter elements. The story of this long night march demonstrates humanity's incredible ability to adapt to harsh natural conditions. These forgotten pages of the past teach us to respect the resilience and determination of those who overcame the insurmountable. Preserving the memory of such events helps us better understand the deep roots of modern cultural traditions. What historical eras or details of daily life would you like to see in our next videos? Be sure to subscribe to the channel so we can explore new hidden pages of the great past together.